Welcome back to This Is Working. I'm Dan Roth, LinkedIn's editor-in-chief. On this show, we talk to leaders who have a significant impact on how we live and how we work. And today we have frequent guest and friend of the show, Ray Dalio. In 1975, Ray Dalio founded what is now the world's largest hedge fund firm, Bridgewater Associates, managing $148 billion worth of assets. To put that into perspective, if Bridgewater were a country, it would be in the top 60 largest countries in the world. 45 years since Ray started the firm, how he built it and how he sees the world have become the things that people seek him out for. At Bridgewater, he built a culture around radical transparency. He then took those lessons and turned them into a book called Principles, which became a New York Times bestseller. In the book and in his writing on LinkedIn, he tackles questions of wealth gaps, of climate change, and about our personal roles in moving society forward. I spoke to Ray back in April, about a month after the US had basically shut down due to the pandemic. And at the time, he shared his vision of what he thought was coming. Now, almost a year later, we're still facing a health and economic crisis, but there's a path to recovery. Ray, through his historical lens, has ideas, opinions, and a plan to help us move forward. And with that, let's bring Ray onto the show.
Hi, Dan.
Hey, Ray, great to have you back again.
So good to be here.
I just want to start with my sincere condolences and all of LinkedIn's sincere condolences for the death of your son. It has been, we're all so saddened by it, and it's been incredible watching you use LinkedIn as a way to talk about what you're going through and to hear people sharing back what they're going through. And I just can't thank you enough for doing that. I just was so sorry about it.
Well, I can't thank your audiences enough. You know, when I first went on social media, I thought, wow, I don't know if I should do that. And then over a period of time, there's actually been a relationship built. And when I was describing it, because there's a sense of relationship, that which came back in the form of condolences and stories of what others were going through. And, you know, so much, the quality of the exchanges was very meaningful, maybe more meaningful than any other exchanges we've had, because, you know, when you have a death of somebody, a loved one, for me, death of a son, my firstborn son, was like the most devastating experience, more important to me than my own life or anything else. And that's meaningful. And to the ability that we could have that kind of exchange in a sense of relationship, a real relationship, that was surprising and very satisfying. So I want to thank those who were participating in that exchange and helped me. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for being so open and for talking. I don't think anyone would have thought anything if you had decided to keep this within your family, but the fact that you shared back and let people talk about what it meant to them, just very meaningful. And we're going to talk about the economy. We're going to talk about the world. I think all of that pales in comparison to what you've been through. It's just it all feels trivial when you've had a death in the family, and death of a child. So I thank you for just continuing to have this conversation and for bringing your voice out to the world.
Really, it is trivial. It does seem trivial, and that changes the prioritization. And I will be, you know, writing maybe one more concluding post of what I've learned in my journey, in the hope that that might help other people.
Okay, we'll be on the lookout for that. I want to start with where we left off last year. We talked very early into as the pandemic was shutting down the economy. One of the things you said you were going to be looking for was how we are with each other. That the fate of this country and a lot of countries goes to how people relate to each other, whether divisions increase or whether we come together, if we do things in a bipartisan nature. It's been maybe 7 months since we talked last. I'm curious if you think that's happening or not.
Well, as I wrote on the LinkedIn pieces, the changing world order, there's a cycle that is repeated over and over again. And there are three factors in that cycle. The first is the money and credit part, produce a lot of debt, monetize it, and the implications of that. That was with us and in the works before, but it got exaggerated. Then there's how we are with each other internally. That means the wealth gap, the values gap, and the political gap for dealing with each other. And history has shown that could lead to civil war. There's a sequence if you have irreconcilable differences. And then there's the third influence, which is the rise of a great power challenging an existing great power. And all of those relate to each other. And then we have the stress test. And so in answer to your question about how we're relating to each other, I think it's now more apparent to probably all of your audience that the answer is that there are irreconcilable differences, that people at both sides, let's call it a lot of the red and the red states and a lot of the blue and the blue states and the parties have greater levels of extremism and actually, want to damage each other. I believe that when the causes people are behind are more important than the system for resolving differences and bringing them together, the system is in jeopardy. So no, it hasn't been good, and it's unlikely to be good. There's a spirit on the Biden administration to say that they do want to do that, but the actual degree of dealing with the irreconcilable differences and the issues that have to be dealt with makes me not very optimistic. I'd like to be optimistic, but it still remains the big thing: how we will deal with each other, and it's a big problem.
Would you say you're less optimistic now than you were even 8 months ago?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The path was clear and written down in that book, so everybody, I hope, will read chapters 8 and 9 in your LinkedIn, because you will see the cycles repeat over and over again. And so the path is sort of clear, and one hopes for deviations from that path. But and there's been a bit of a movement in terms of the desired intent. But I really think that what's required is to resolve the differences. And what would be required would be, I think, one of two things. I think that there has to be a reaching, that the moderates of each party have got to come together. And that could either happen by, let's say, President Biden bringing into the tent Republicans and doing something like having a Manhattan Project, in which everybody agrees that there needs to be a form of restructuring, have smart people, bipartisan, dealing with the changes that are necessary, something like that, a bipartisan thing. Or perhaps the development of a third party where the moderates can come together and so there's choices, because historically the swing power can have a significant effect. But I think right now in each of the parties, the wings of those parties are at risk, and I worry that the moderates will not have a place, because if you look at history, you see that you can't be a moderate. The circumstances get to the point where you have to make a choice. And they say you make a choice, and moderation is perceived as weakness. So that polarity, I think, is likely to increase. But anyway, those are my thoughts on that.
Well, I'd love to get your thought on what business's role is here, if at all. We had Carol Tomé, the CEO of UPS, on recently. UPS had taken all their money out of any PACs that supported anyone around the January 6th insurrection. Is there and in the last year, we've seen CEOs and leaders really starting to speak up on topics that they hadn't spoken up on before, really feeling like they need to get drawn into this conversation around division, polarity, racial equality. These are things that business leaders in the past haven't necessarily added their voice to. So On this topic of division, on wealth gaps, what is business's role either in bringing us together or just speaking out about it?
First of all, there's not the only movement comes from kind of threats. When I wasn't much more than a year ago that I wrote the piece on LinkedIn, which was called Why and How Capitalism Needs to Be Reformed. And that was a very, very controversial piece. And we talked about some of those issues. And then there's been a movement. I remember, when the Business Council and Jamie Dimon made that point that companies should operate this way. That there's been a movement and there's been a movement also to ESG investing and so on, which is a movement sort of in that direction under the pressures of the circumstances. But that won't resolve material differences, and that won't be enough to deal with the circumstances. And I don't know how well it sticks. I mean, I think, what is it even? What is, a company says that they're going to do those better practices and so on, and those are good moves. But really, what is it? At the end of the day, it's almost a matter of, to have changes, almost the question is, what are the rules? What are the laws? And how does that work? And to be able to make those changes along those lines while increasing productivity and agreeing how to do that is key, because I'm not knocking capitalism. I'm a capitalist. There's the cycle. I believe in that whole thing, but there's actually an engineering exercise that needs to take place that makes an improvement in productivity at the same time as it makes it for most of the people. And there's not the structural engineering that really is going on. So let's take something, there's so many dimensions to this, but you could take something like robotics and AI and the replacing of people. So it's an innocuous thing. It's a business needs to run its business in the most efficient way. And it's exemplified by COVID. And if you have machines doing the work, they don't get COVID, they don't strike, they don't get upset. They may be a lot cheaper. Well, that's moving in that direction. Okay, so now you run a company, and that direction widens the wealth gap and widens the income gap. I'm not saying it's a good thing. It may be good for productivity, but what that means for a society doesn't have a game plan. Like, what is that going to do? So you need structural changes that are well thought through. And what I'm hearing is, good intentions and a little bit of a move, but it's not really dealing with those types of structural changes.
And are you seeing, first, I want to remind everyone, this is Working. We're on with Ray Dalio. We're talking about the current state of the economy, of political polarization, and of where things are headed. Please keep leaving your comments and questions in the chat. I'm going to go to one comment right now because it deals with what we're talking about. Actually, I'll be curious to know whether you think it deals with what we're talking about, which is the Robinhood, GameStop, AMC questions of it's been painted as being the little guys versus the big guys, or rising up against hedge funds, or other people are saying, no, this is just stock manipulation or trying to game the stock market. Do you see this movement as part of the larger whole, as being something bigger than just movement in one stock?
Well, there is what it literally is. And then there's the underlying sentiment of one group sort of thinking that, little guys killing the big guys or something like that. I mean, what it is it's great. When I was a kid, I played in the markets the way they did when I was young, and I didn't have much money. I caddied and I played in the market. And that group of people is getting that experience, and they engineered a short squeeze, and that's great. So it was a short squeeze. And there are issues about, how fast the transactions, and then there are clearinghouse issues and those kinds of things. That's what it really was. But however, it caught everybody's attention, and it became a thing which is, like the little guy bringing down the big guy. Now, America has been great because of little guys bringing down the big guys, meaning you could take Steve Jobs or Bill Gates, I felt in my own way, I started out of a 2-bedroom apartment and there was the big investment firms. And so I relate to American entrepreneurship to bring down the little guys or to out the big guys. I love that spirit. But there is also the almost cheering on the hurting. So it depends what it is, really. If it's, I think that we're in an environment in which you can, almost have it, the taste of blood and the taste of harm, rather than operating within a system where you say, that's part of the system and it evolves. So I think the question is, what's it symptomatic of? Why is it so, what is it in the media? It's almost like a Netflix show that we're going to watch in which throats are going to be slit or something. I don't know if it's symptomatic of that which it looks a bit like that I find symptomatic of the circumstances we're in.
Wow, we have a lot of people joining from all over the world, listening into what you have to say. Let me read some of these names. We got Joan and Richard in joining the chat. We got Carol from Canada, Sarah in Iran. Excellent, some great people joining in. Ray, what do you think of when you look at what the movement of people from working in offices to being able to work anywhere? How do you think about how that has an impact on some of these divisions? Does it help that you now have people leaving big cities and going to smaller, more affordable towns and bringing their thoughts and beliefs with them? Does it create new bubbles, blue bubbles in red areas? Does it bring us together? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that it's just the tremendous capacity of adaptation. That's humanity's greatest strength, the capacity to adapt and build technologies and so on. And so it evolves. And some people will say it's better and some people will say it's worse. And I don't think I'm wise enough to say, other than I could say in some ways it's better, in some ways it's worse. I think, though, that the migration that you're referring to is due more to the wealth gap differences and the values gap differences. So there is a migration going on from some states to other states. I don't think it's primarily driven by the COVID issue. It's partially driven by taxes, and there's a financial component to it, which is the usual kind of hollowing out component to it, which I'll describe in a second. But it's also driven by differences in values and hospitality. This dynamic of a hollowing out is when you have, this is just a principle. When you have a large wealth gap and a lot of debt, and you have an economic downturn, people are going to be at each other's throats. And you'll have irreconcilable differences, financial and also behavioral. And that leads people then to move. If they have the ability to move, they get up and they move. And that kind of migration is happening. Some people feel places like, I don't know, Miami, Austin, Texas, and so on, not just for taxes, but for how they should live, whether it's regulatory or am I around people who won't be angry at me and all of that. That kind of thing is going on, and that's going on in a big way. And that, I think, is the big thing. Technologies will adapt, and we will work in different ways. It's an experimentation. It's a learning process because you have it. And then let's say you get rid of the pandemic. then you have a choice, and you've learned something along the way, and there's been developments of technologies, and then we choose. But so that doesn't bother me, but the other one does.
All right, we are here with Ray Dalio on This Is Working. We have people joining in, more people joining in. Cedric in Atlanta, Charlie in Boca Raton. We got Maria in Portugal, Richard from South Africa, Huma from California. Leah asks a good question, which is about housing. We'd love to know your thoughts on what the pandemic means for renters and for evictions, and how you think about housing within this whole mix of how the economy functions.
Housing, there's so many dimensions to housing, like where do you want to live, and does that change versus, let's say, rent versus own? If that's changing, rent, it's easier to move than owning, and maybe one might think the flexibility of that is a consideration. There is the issue of financially, what is better to do? There's the dimension of how do you have a better lifestyle? How do you have roots? There's part of it, like, do you want to own an asset now? Like, I think, generally speaking, it's better to own assets. And I include then, assets, meaning I think we're in an environment where there's going to need to be a lot of debt creation of the sort that we have seen, because that's where the checks come from. And there's going to need to be more printing of money by central banks to buy that debt. And that might have a financial impact on the house. So that there are so many things that go through my mind along those. Each one of those, I could sort of delve into, but I probably would spend too much time. But it's all of those considerations, I think, that enter into when one thinks about owning a house or renting a house.
But in general, you're pro ownership, it sounds like, no matter what's going on in the macro.
Well, no, I am about the bias. However, we're in an environment where flexibility, the ability to change one's mind and adapt, is important. So if you have uncertainties, I would, give that consideration. If it was normal times in a normal place, I think home ownership is a terrific thing, because it's like a forced savings, and it allows you to build it and make it what you want. And it also is your environment. You get to choose the environment that you want to raise your family in, or that you want to be in. And so all of that is almost supersedes other things in terms of it being a choice. So I love home ownership as a general vehicle, but then there are those other considerations that enter into it.
All right, I got to ask you about a question. You made headlines recently by weighing in on Bitcoin, which you called a hell of an invention. Would you give us some of your thoughts on how you see Bitcoin, where it's useful, and I know you've been getting a lot of feedback from huge fans of Bitcoin and people who are very anti-Bitcoin. So where are you now?
So the reason I wrote it on LinkedIn was so that people could see it in my own words, because what I find is that people who are pro Bitcoin grab the certain sentences, and that people who are anti Bitcoin grab the other sentences. And, so Ray Dalio is supporting Bitcoin, or it says it's a hell of an invention. And it is a hell of an invention. Wow. Think about how great it was. And then others who basically, there's, sort of the concluding part of it also, that, it could go down. It could be outlawed. It can be, there are a number of things that are real concerns, and it also can be, go down 80% or something like that, or could be even more, and it's an option on a number of uncertainty things. Those are what's brought out by those who don't like Bitcoin. So life is not so simple, and when I you like it, and that. So I tried to be clear in what it is. and I don't even consider myself a particular expert on Bitcoin. I mean, I have to understand it because of the business I'm in. But anyway, I would encourage people who are interested in that to take a look at my broader assessment. And I think it's like in 2 pages or 3 pages, so it's not long.
But your take is, in general, you wouldn't mind putting money into it as long as you are okay losing 80% of that. Is that right?
Yeah. Let me give you the big picture.
Yeah.
Okay. I worry that we are in an environment in which there's the classic creation of debt and the creation of money. And that if you look at history, there are real assets and there are financial assets. And the way it works is real assets are the things you buy. You buy things you want to use. Your car, your house, your video streaming systems, somebody who helps you do something, all those things. Those are things you're using. And those are, it's the tangible stuff, pretty much. And then there is financial wealth. And people confuse financial wealth. Financial wealth is holding instruments or financial assets for the purpose of one day selling those financial assets to buy the things you want to buy. And there's a cycle. And the way the cycle works is there's an increase. This cycle, by the way, has happened throughout time. There's an increase in financial assets relative to real assets that gives buying power, and everybody likes it. It was actually pretty much discovered in varying degrees. It goes back in history, the debt cycles and everything for forever, for thousands of years. But let's say if you take 1700s or so, there was the discovery of that you could actually pay people with promises to deliver money and that has not been earned. So imagine that, the Dutch really, and before them others, but the French to some extent, came up with the idea like of a company. And what a company gives you, or even what you get in debt, is the promise that when they someday earn a profit, they will someday give you a share of that profit, or the bond is operating that way. So you build up financial assets that are large relative to tangible assets, the real assets. And the cycle is that if people want to get they think they've got value in those things that are going up. And but what happens is there are too many of them. And so when they go to try to turn their financial assets into tangible assets, and a large number of people do that, that's when you have the cycle work in reverse. And so you have, that's like what a bank run is. And then central banks have got to print money. And so that printing of money reduces the value of money and so on. So I think that pattern and understanding that pattern, is very important.
Well, right. The cycle and waiting for that moment where the cycle starts running in reverse is, I think, what we're all wondering where we are.
So Bitcoin serves a purpose in a sense of there are not enough of those tangible assets. So now let's take a look at Bitcoin from that lens. Okay. Let's go through some of the big points related to Bitcoin. First of all, it's alchemy, right? Mm-hmm. It's alchemy, meaning it's great. What you do is you invent a money that, and you own it all. And then you make other people like it, and it becomes a reality. And you get very rich because you own it, and then you have it come out, and it builds a self-reinforcing cycle, and it can become money if it's just a matter of faith in it, and then sort of it operates that way. And then because money doesn't have a reality, money is like it's like the tulip mania or whatever. You can it doesn't have to have intrinsic value. It can have that. So now you're dealing with that quality. It's an alternative gold, basically, or it's an alternative real value asset in a sense, except it's digital. And then that makes it, have its own questions. By the way, I would say another related topic, is the risks of hacking and digitalization.
There are a lot of, I think that a lot of people are wondering, how many risks are there with Bitcoin? Should they be owning it? So I think this is a really good framework to understand what it is and what it isn't.
The answer to the question, I think, has to be, you probably do not own enough, real money assets, hard money assets relative to financial assets. And Bitcoin is one of those possibilities that has attributes that are attractive, and then it has risks. Like one of the big risks is not allowing it to exist. Okay, in 1694, we had the world's first central bank, really, the Bank of England. And the reason they had the Bank of England was because the central bank, why do you have a central bank? It's because the government wants to control the money within that territory. Every country wants to have a central bank, and it wants to have a monopoly on controlling the money within that country. And that's an issue. And so that's why, by the way, when you saw in the 30s and different times gold outlawed, then you could see Bitcoin outlawed and all of those types of things. But can it stand the time? How does it work? All of those remain questions. So Bitcoin is kind of, it's a chip that one could put on, but think about broader, don't recognize what type of asset is it, in a sense. It is one of those, it's an alternative gold kind of asset.
Right.
And that's, if you think of it that way, and then start to say, like how much gold do you have and how much Bitcoin do you have? Like I wouldn't want to have the majority of my money in Bitcoin. I wouldn't want to have more money in Bitcoin than I had in gold. Because let's say central banks, for example, the world's money is held by central banks who are dealing between countries. There's the money within countries, which is their currency, but it's controlled within the countries and it's manipulated and so on. And kind of the real money is the money that works across countries. And so you almost have to say, what will they hold their reserves in? You almost look at what they're holding their reserves in and those kinds of assets. And history has shown that even periods of greater conflict, there's less credit. And that's why there was a tendency to go to gold or even silver. That's why sterling was the British pound, or China used sterling. So you have to think of it as kind of like one of those and kind of an option on one of those, I think. That may be worthless, and it may be important, and it allows you to do certain things, and it has its vulnerabilities.
Ray, as someone with 3 kids, almost all of my money is now in Pokemon cards. I don't know if that's what you'd recommend or not, but I want to ask you one question.
I'm sure that my clients and everybody will be asking me what I think about it as a storehold of wealth.
Right. I want to ask you I want to put you on the spot. There's a lot of questions coming in on the stream about this, which is, you talked a lot about inequality, income inequality, about what we need to do as a country. If you were serving in the Biden administration, or if you were advising the administration, is there one policy that you would encourage them to be focused on right now?
Let me answer that question as, I don't care which policies are put into place, as long as they're bipartisan and they're smart enough to increase productivity. Everybody has their own way of wanting to do it, and everybody fights that, oh, you should do this thing. I've got a million of those. I've got a lot of those. But because nobody can agree on anything, that's why I say, if I was President Biden, what I would do is reach to the other side as far to the other side of the Republican Party as I could, I'd bring them into the tent and realize that in order to be president of the United States, you have to get the majority of people, and the fringes go. And I would do something like create a Manhattan Project of smart people from both sides to re-engineer how it works to achieve the goal, that it works well for most people. And then I would then say, those on the left and those on the right who were in that tent, I would then say, now it's your job to bring as many of the other people in it. So I don't care exactly what it is. I have my own views. I think education is a fabulous investment and it's unfair. And so I can go into those things. But I think that the most important thing is that we do it in a bipartisan and smart way so that we can increase the size of the pie as well as divide it well. I'm really worried that everybody right now just thinking, where do you give money? And there's not enough thought to productivity or bipartisanship.
Well, that's terrific. Ray, thank you so much. It is always great to have you here. And thank you again for sharing your thoughts, your historical perspective, for encouraging people to think bigger and think about where everything that we do fits within the cycle. I think it's really important. And we so often focus on the day-to-day that maybe we miss what the big picture is and what's happened in the past that we can use as guidance. So it's always great to have you here and helping frame some of these issues.
Thank you, Dan. And thank you again to your viewers and those on LinkedIn. I really appreciate the relationship.
Thanks, Ray. Okay, remember, we release each episode of This Is Working as a podcast. You can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts, and you can get more advice from the world's top leaders by subscribing to my newsletter using the link you see on the screen. I think we're also going to drop that link into the chat. So if you click on that, you can subscribe to the newsletter. We will be back with more This Is Working next week. And always remember to follow LinkedIn News for daily shows, daily updates. And we want to hear from you. So please let us know what you think of the show, who you want to see on it, what kind of topics you want to cover. And we will talk to you then.